doing on a Monday lunchtime, but thanks for joining us to hear what someone might say to the title of Crystal's Near-Death Experiences and the Supernatural. Is there more to life than the material world? And I just wanted to start by sharing the story of someone called George Ritchie, which just advanced. That one. Thank you. So I want to tell you a story about someone called George Ritchie, who was a medical student, or at the time he was just about to become a medical student. It's 1943, he's in South Texas, and he basically develops double pneumonia, very, very poorly lungs. This is the time before antibiotics were very prevalent, so he becomes very ill, develops a very severe fever, and essentially dies. And he dies in this hospital, in this army hospital, and he is pronounced dead by the doctor. And there's a nurse that's presiding over this, who's so upset by the fact that this young man in his early 20s has died very suddenly, that he persuades the doctor to inject adrenaline very close to the heart of this young man. Now that's a very unusual procedure. It's very normal now to have resuscitation techniques, and that's why the whole field of near-death experiences is even a thing now, because we can resuscitate people. But what happened was, after having been dead for 9 minutes, they injected adrenaline into this man's heart, and he revived. He came back to life, if you like. And he actually recounts that while he was physiologically dead, he was actually vividly conscious. And he goes on a few years later to write about what happened during those 9 minutes in a book called Return from Tomorrow. Now, George Ritchie is now one of many. There are actually many different, many decades of research that have taken place in this field of near-death experiences. How do we make sense of them? You know, if they're genuine, then we're saying that when all the material processes in someone's body have shut down, they continue to be alive. And so they sit in contrast with the idea that we are material beings in a purely material world. And we live in a world in which scientific explanations carry weight, they carry the highest authority, they carry the greatest intellectual weight. I very much bought into that. I already said a little bit that I've spent many years as a scientist studying biochemistry, then doing a PhD in brain imaging over in Cambridge, and very much absorbed the view as an undergrad that matter was all that there is, and that science was answer to our questions. And I think often any sort of belief in the supernatural can seem very anti-scientific and very anti-intellectual. And I actually came to realise that that's not the case. You see, today I'm a Christian, but I haven't always been. And there are many attempts to explain away near-death experiences that I'm sure you will be aware of as well. So one of them is hallucination. Surely that this guy and all the other people that have had them are just hallucinating. But the problem with this is you need a working brain to hallucinate. And there are also people that have hallucinated and they've had a near-death experience, and they say those are two really different things. So hallucination may not necessarily do it. Some people say, it might be residual brain activity, that actually there's still some activity in the brain that can account for this experience. But the problem is that we now know that within a minute or two of cardiac arrest, the brain shuts down. All the kind of brain activity ceases to be recorded. And so for someone that's been clinically dead for longer than a couple of minutes, we can be fairly certain there's no brain activity. So the idea of it being due to residual activity doesn't quite stack up. And also, How do you account for the fact that they're vividly conscious? That's not what you would expect in a dying brain in its last moments. Actually, we're seeing a disproportionality of vibrantly vivid conscious experience, even when their brain is in shutdown. So residual activity doesn't seem to work either. And then there's fabrication, which we can't rule out and has happened, but not necessarily in every case. And there are some people who really believe what happened to them was real, so much so that they are willing to actually change their beliefs on the basis of what happened to them. One such person who I may talk about later in the week is Dr. Eben Alexander, who developed a very severe bacterial meningitis at the age of 54. All the areas in his brain known to correlate with consciousness entirely shut down. He was expected to die. His family were told to put their affairs in order. But extraordinarily, he survived. Now, prior to his near-death experience, he was a Harvard neurosurgeon. And Harvard neurosurgeons believe if you do not have a working cortex, you cannot be conscious. After he came out of his coma, he recounted an extremely vivid conscious experience that caused him to change his mind and say that his experience showed him that the death of the body and the brain are not the end of consciousness, that human experience continues beyond the grave. Now, as a Harvard neurosurgeon, that is an unpopular view. And you wouldn't change it unless you actually believed what happened to you was genuine. And so, as I say, there are many decades of research. This has gone beyond anecdotal. And there is lots of things out there, journals that have been formed and so on. Now, I'm actually not here to make a case for near-death experiences. I think they're really interesting. I think they're fascinating. I'm not offering them as a proof of God. I'm not offering them as a proof of heaven. But I am saying this. Even if only one genuine instance of a near-death experience has happened, that is a blow to the view that we live in a purely material universe. And surely gives us pause for thought. Can material explanations explain everything about our world? What if there is more to us than just matter? What if there's more to this world than we can see with our eyes? Now, many people today consider themselves to be spiritual, but not religious. There was an article in the Times recently, just a couple of weeks ago, reporting on a survey of about 10,000 people, commissioned by someone who was definitely not a Christian, about to release a book called The Devil's Gospels. They were really surprised by what they found. It said that Gen Z, which is people in their teens and early 20s, are much more likely to describe themselves as spiritual than older generations. It said 62% of 18 to 24-year-olds say they are fairly or very spiritual, compared with 36% in the over 55s. And they also are least likely to describe themselves as atheists. Only 13% of under 25s now call themselves atheists. And they were blown away by these statistics and were not expecting to find them. Now, I don't know whether this describes you, I'm not saying it should, but in general, the belief that there's more to this world than just material things is increasing in your age group. It is on the rise. That is what is happening in the wider sense of things. Now, spirituality can take many forms. Some people are into meditation, they're into mindfulness or yoga, where your state of mind and your breathing techniques have an impact on physical and emotional well-being. Some people are into crystals, and that's the belief that crystals carry energy that has a powerful effect that can manifest in your life in all kinds of ways. So some different crystals bring different things, from strength, Some bring love and clarity, change, transformation, luck and fortune, even wealth and prosperity. I am told that crystals have a power to attract the right people, and you are drawn to the right crystals for you. Other people deal with positive and negative energy through Reiki, or through having a spiritual reading, or through witch talk, which is a channel that is viewed billions of times. And then there are ghost hunters, and there are those chasing spiritual experiences through psychedelic drugs and all kinds of manipulations of the mind. When we talk about being spiritual, it's actually very wide-ranging in terms of how people think about it. I wonder why there's so much interest in the supernatural today. I wonder why it's on the rise. I wonder if there are a couple of reasons. One of those is, I think, traditional religions have shown themselves to be a bit dry, a bit irrelevant, a bit boring, and even a bit unfriendly, even a bit abusive. Why spend time on something historic when you can be in the moment and have something new and exciting? And so actually some people have engaged and embraced spiritual practices because they've walked away from organised religion. And there may be others in the room, or just in general, that are attracted to spiritual because actually atheism has shown itself to be a bit dry, a bit uninteresting. Actually, the fact that I'm just a pack of neurons, that doesn't really describe me. Actually, life is a bit more interesting than that. Atheism hasn't shown itself for what it said it was going to be. It didn't hold all the promise that it was claiming to hold. And so people are looking for more. Could that be what's happening? Well, what does the Christian faith have to say? Does it have anything to say about this conversation around spirituality? Actually, many people assume it doesn't. They just assume it's just kind of boring old hymns and traditions and history. But actually, it affirms the spirituality that we are seeking. It actually provides a basis for it. Quite early on in the Bible, in this book called Genesis, it describes human beings as being integrated, physical and spiritual beings. It says that God, this is not a scientific account, don't read it scientifically, it's describing things that happen, but not in a literal way, but it's saying that God formed man and woman from the dust of the ground, dust, physical matter, and breathed into their nostrils the breath of life. And they became a living being. In other words, we are physical matter and breath of God. And actually, the word for that is neshama ruach, which means spirit or breath. It's saying actually, yeah, we are spiritual. We're integrated, dust and breath. That's what human being is. Actually, the product is nefesh, which is the Hebrew word for soul. And that's interesting in and of itself. So what does this mean? It means that when you see things like what's happening in your brain when you engage spiritually, that's not a threat to the authenticity of what's happening. It's not something that calls into question whether God exists or any other being for that matter. It's simply saying we're integrated, physical and spiritual beings. Exactly what we should see, stuff happening in the brain when you engage spiritually. And another reason that Christianity gives for this is that we are made by a God who is spirit. Actually, a God who is one in his being, but three in his person. Father and Son, Jesus Christ, and Holy Spirit. And we are made in the image of this God. And so actually, the Christian faith actually affirms why we're searching for spiritual things, why we're inherently spiritual. And so to anyone who might have disregarded the Christian faith as having nothing spiritually to offer, actually, it is deeply supernatural. The most central things that Christians believe make no sense unless there's a supernatural realm to this world, unless things beyond the natural can actually happen. You see, Christians believe that not only does God exist, he became a human, he became a God-man, and that somehow that happened through the working of the Holy Spirit. And that God-man, Jesus Christ, lived and died by crucifixion, and then he rose from the dead. He broke the death barrier, and again, not possible in the natural. Material explanations cannot account for that, and somehow it happened through the power of the Holy Spirit, raising Jesus to life. And actually, to be a Christian, when Christians talk about this weird phrase like being born again, what they mean is the same Holy Spirit that raised Jesus from the grave comes to live in you. And that's what makes you deeply spiritual as a Christian. You have the Holy Spirit with you always. The purest, most beautiful, kindest, holiest spiritual being that there ever was and is, lives in us. That can live in you. That's what it means to be a Christian. Christianity is also a belief that involves angels, demons, healings, dreams, visions, prophecy, and more. And so at its core, Christianity is deeply supernatural. And if it's true, it may sound weird, but the plus side is life is a whole lot more interesting than we previously thought it was. There's this whole other realm that's going about its business and its stuff while we get on in this capacity as well. An interesting thought, isn't it? But here's a question. If this supernatural world is real, is it a one-size-fits-all neutral zone? You see, a lot of people that I talk to think of their spirituality as just being neutral. It's just there. But some actually would say their spiritual experiences have been good, and others would say they've been really bad and really damaging, actually, really harmful. And one person, I just really enjoyed reading Ashley Land's book called The Thing That Would Make Everything Okay Forever. That describes what she was searching for. She was searching for the thing that would make everything okay forever, and describes her story of trying psychedelic drugs as a college student and seeing them as a route to transcendence, of realizing what life is all about, what lies at the core of the universe, the route to knowledge and insight about life and even about God, even a means to realizing her own divine status. But the problem was that every time she took these drugs, this realization was always elusive, it was always just beyond her grasp. It kept her wanting more and more, and eventually as time went on, her trips began to get darker and darker. She even ended up seeing an apparition of what she describes as the devil, an evil being that was out to harm her. But it didn't manage to stop her for a long time, always wanting more. Just one more trip, just one more, and then I'll get there. And Ashley Land is not alone in her experiences. Some of these things out there, they have the appearance of offering us freedom and enlightenment, but they can take us down a path that isn't good for us and could leave us feeling empty and worse. And Land's spiral downwards into darkness ultimately led her to turn to Jesus Christ, who says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And her constant chasing of something that never seemed to satisfy, this carrot dangling just ahead, always slightly out of reach, led her to Jesus Christ, who says, I am the bread of life, and whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. In other words, Jesus has the capacity. If you put your trust in him, he will satisfy the deepest longings of your heart that you can find nowhere else. And it has been my experience over the last 30 years of following Jesus that is absolutely true. And Lan came to realise that as well. She said in her very first LSD trip, when she had this mind-bending experience, she had this revelation: there is so much more than I ever thought there was. And she said at the very end of her journey, when she was turning to Christ, the same thought came to her: there is so much more than I ever thought that there was. It was just in the last place I'd ever thought to look. Indeed, the one place I had already written off. I wonder if you've written off the person of Jesus Christ already. I wonder if I could persuade you this week to take another look. It might be that you've written off something that actually does hold the keys to life, the keys to satisfying our deepest longings. I don't know if you know Aldous Huxley, philosopher and author of books such as Brave New World, and a huge fan of psychedelics, took LSD on his deathbed. And one of the things he's quoted as saying just before the end is, it's never enough. It's never enough. Never enough. Is there a way to be spiritually fulfilled so that we're not constantly chasing? What is the deepest expression of our spirituality? Often the goal is to pursue, to chase, to enter some new reality. But wouldn't things be more permanent if that new reality could live in us? Well, to be a Christian is to be the dwelling place of the purest, kindest, highest spiritual being that there is, the dwelling place of the Holy Spirit. And that is not some amorphous life force, that is not some impersonal consciousness that you need to detach from reality in order to realise. The Holy Spirit is a person that already knows you, already loves you, and invites you to walk with him. Made possible through Jesus. How can a Holy Spirit dwell in an unholy person? That's made possible through Jesus, who offers us forgiveness, who makes us clean, so that the Holy Spirit can live in us. What does it look like? It looks like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. These are the kinds of things. It's real, it's gritty, it's earthy, it's not some weird transcendent experience. Actually, you want these things in your life. That's what the Holy Spirit gives you. You walk closely. There's security, safety, and acceptance. God not trying to mess with us, not trying to dangle a carrot, but actually loves us already. Whatever you decide you believe about him, he loves you anyway. He always will. Some people describe crystals as beckoning the right people towards them, that you find the crystals that are right for you. God is in the business of drawing people to himself. That's partly why the Christians in this university are hosting these events this week, because they believe God is drawing people to himself. Will you let yourself be drawn to the God that loves you and knows you? I'm aware that as we close, I'm just reminded that there are at least two kinds of people in the room. Firstly, perhaps you consider yourself a spiritual person, that you definitely believe there is more to life than just the material world. I want to ask you, have you considered that there might be an even deeper expression of your spirituality? That there is actually the Holy Spirit. Spirit of Jesus who loves you and knows you and wants to be friends, wants to have a friendship with you. Or maybe you're in a different place and you're actually not convinced that there's more to life than the material world. Well, you'd be similar to what I was like at your age. And I want to remind you that belief in the supernatural doesn't require you to discard the natural. It's not an unthinking, unscientific thing to do. It simply says alongside the natural of this world, alongside the material processes that science can discover and uncover and describe very beautifully, there's another dimension that sits alongside. It's not that you need to choose between these two things. They actually both can exist together. And one thing I came to realise is that the best scientists are those who are open to new ideas. You know, if you're doing natural science, you design a study with a hypothesis of what you believe should happen. You collect data, you analyse the data, and you measure it up against the starting hypothesis. And if it fits, you know you're onto the right thing. But if it doesn't, if the data doesn't fit, you have to be willing to acknowledge that the starting hypothesis might not be the right one. And so I want to ask you this week, are you open to the possibility that there might be more to this world than just what you can see with your eyes? Are you open to the possibility that there might be reasons why 62% of people in your generation are spiritual? That they believe that there is more. I actually changed my views. I'll close with this. As a biochemistry student, I was on a journey of many months, but part of my journey was I dated a really strong atheist in my first year, and they have really strong views. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but when someone's views are so strong, it's just easier to absorb their views than to really think, what do I believe? And so it wasn't until that relationship ended that I actually had time to think, what do I actually believe? And I remember recalling a conversation with this now ex-boyfriend when we were still together, and he said, you know, I think when you die, oblivion, that is it, there is no God, you know, when you physically die, that is the end of you. And I remember looking back to this conversation and asking myself, what if there's a God anyway? Like, I can come up with all the arguments, all the reasoning that I like, what if God exists anyway, whether I like it or not? And that was a really interesting conversation that I had with myself that obviously did lead me to the person of Jesus Christ. I just leave that with you.